Hello and welcome to 315 Voices. I'm your host, Greg Scott. 1 Peter 3:15 reminds us to always be prepared to give an account when we are asked for the reason for the hope that's in us. And today's guest is Dr. Keelan Cook. Keelan is currently the Assistant Professor of Missions and the Director of the Center of Great Commission Studies at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. He's going to talk today about some of his own experiences in international missions and what it's like to prepare the next generation of church missionaries while encouraging those already in the field along the way. His love for carrying out the Great Commission is contagious, and so I'm glad that you've joined the podcast today. I know you're going to enjoy our time with Keelan Cook. So welcome to the podcast. It's good to see you, Keelan.
You too, Greg. I really appreciate you having me on, man.
No, it's great to have you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I know our listeners are going to have a treat today. So we'll dive right into just a couple of background things for people that don't know you. Look back in your life as you're talking about your story and kind of your faith journey and along the way of, I think I feel called to do this as a full-time service.
Let me start at, how did I cross the line of faith maybe? And then from there, we'll work forward to trying to figure out what it was that I felt like the Lord was using to say, I think this is the kind of stuff that I want you to do with your life, right? So I became a Christian at a pretty early age. I was, I think, 7 when it happened. It was, I would say, a genuine conversion at the time too. But it was a bit of a weird scenario that surrounded it for me. I grew up in a home that was decidedly not Christian in the beginning. And so my earliest memories, and we're from Middle Tennessee. My family is. I was kind of born up out in a cow pasture in the middle of nowhere in a tiny little town in Middle Tennessee. So I grew up kind of out in the middle of the sticks. My earliest memory of my dad was him kind of crouched over in our driveway in a pair of very cut off blue jean shorts, no t-shirt, a straw cowboy hat with a paintbrush, hand painting his Chevy pickup truck. That's my earliest visual memory of my dad. And so we grew up in a home where I was unchurched, growing up in my earliest years. And we had a guy knock on our door one day and invite us to church. It was somebody that my mom had grown up in church with. He had recently become a pastor and planted a little church in our town. And so he was out inviting people. He stumbled across my family. And of course, they knew each other. And so they get to talking. And we wound up going to this guy's church. Then 2 or 3 months in, now we're going to Sunday school. We're going to church. We're there every week. And it took a little while, probably a couple of years. But over the next couple of years, here I am, a little kid. I'm 5, 6 years old. I'm noticing my environment around me change in some pretty significant ways. My dad was probably at the time a better part of an alcoholic. The language in our home was not good language. The stuff that was on the TV was not, stuff that you'd want to see on TV. I can remember finding a Roach clip one time and being like, Mom, what's this? A couple of years into this, though, what was on the TV had changed. The alcohol disappeared from the house. The language in the home changed. The way my parents treated one another and me was shifting. And all that was going on in the background. And all this time we were going to this church, and there was one particular evening. I know I had heard it a whole bunch before then, but there was one particular evening. We were in an evening service, and I heard the gospel again, and it clicked. It all clicked. Everything just kind of clicked for me. And I realized my own state as a sinner in that moment. And I just kind of felt the wickedness, right? I felt the conviction for sin. I go through the whole process, having some conversations with the pastor, and wind up becoming a Christian in that moment because it all started to click that that's what had happened to my parents over the last couple of years. And so I'm seeing all the pieces fit together in that moment. I watched over time what the Lord did in our family. My dad and mom completely changed in who they were. Yes, in that 2 years. But Dad wound up, and even today, he's 70 years old, and he is for the better part an associate pastor at his little church there in Tennessee. So I watched that kind of stuff happen in my life, and it made a tremendous impact over time to see just the genuineness of faith that resulted from that true conversion of my parents' heart. Right? I got to grow up in what I would consider a really godly home after that.
We hear a lot of stories where someone says, I've been in church since 9 months before my birthday.
Right.
And, and they grow up knowing nothing different. And I love your story that you definitely knew something different. And even at a young age, God was able to reach down into your heart and say, I'm the difference. The relationship with Christ is the difference. It's just a different story than we hear from somebody. You really did grow up in church, minus the first few years.
That's right. And it is. I think of it as kind of a best of both worlds scenario, but I do have memory of what life was like before Christ for my family. I've got that. But it happened early enough in my story, and this is just kind of the kindness of the Lord, that I grew up in church. It's a really interesting one. And man, I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the way that worked, because the genuineness of my parents' faith was an important testimony for me to understand kind of what was going on and what the gospel does to somebody, because I just watched it happen in our own family.
Full disclosure for anybody that's listening today is that Keelan and I have known each other probably 15 years, and I've only known probably longer than that, Keelan. But
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe 20 years. I've only known adult Keelan, but I know you as an analytical thinker.
Yeah.
And that's not something you develop. That's something that's genetically ingrained in you. And so God knew how he had to do that. And you would have, I don't know how it would have been for, you still would have analyzed, and I still think the Lord obviously could have and would have gotten your attention even if you hadn't had that experience. But you were able to see both worlds of this is definitely what life looks like in the people I know the most and know the best without Christ. And this is now what it looks like, and the only thing that's changed is this. And
that's it.
I really love it. So it's a great transitional piece to say now, later on in life, you feel a call to full-time service.
Yeah, so it was after college even. I landed there at Union University and went to college there in kind of a Christian environment that I thought would help form some of that for me. But I had no desire, no plan to be in any kind of ministry. That wasn't the aim. So I went there for a degree in public relations and advertising. That's what my undergrad degree is in. I was very much on the way to hey, I'm just going to be a really good church member. Maybe I'll teach a Sunday school class or something if I get asked. But really, I want to be in the business world. It was actually after I graduated college. I got into the business world. I was serving as a consultant for a while. And this is where you and I, our story kind of crosses paths, right? It was through the next year or two that the Lord really started to lay some tracks for me into gospel ministry. I actually got approached by one of the pastors there at church and got asked if I'd be willing to lead a book study for the 3 or 4 other college students we had kind of running around the church. And I said, sure, I'd be fine leading a book study. I'll tell you here, if I had been asked to do a Bible study, I don't know that I would have felt capable or qualified to lead a Bible study. But they said book study. And so I said, sure, I'll do that. And a theme of my entire story is God's sovereignty and my ignorance to what he's actually doing in the background. That's kind of my whole life. And so I say yes to this. And there's 3 or 4 or 5 college students running around when we started the study. And man, maybe it's just the fact that this was the first time they'd had something for college students at all. And so they all invited their friends, and 4 turned into 8, and 8 turned into 16. And by the end of the book study, we had 30 or 40 of them kind of running around. I had no anticipation that was going to happen. But a couple of things happened at the end of that book study that really set the next trajectory for me. One, I overheard one of them refer to me as their college minister. That was not right. I was not a college minister. I was just leading this book study. I corrected them. In fact, I was like, no, that's not. I'm not nothing like that. And then the next thing that happened was even more significant than that. We got done with the book, and I now had all these students here that wanted to meet the next week, and they didn't want to do a book study. They all wanted to do a Bible study. And so now I'm kind of hung, and I've got to do some kind of Bible study with these students. And so I will never forget this next moment in my life, because it was this watershed moment for me. It changed all of my direction. We picked some Bible study to do. I do not remember the content of the Bible study at all. And I get up and I lead this Bible study for this group of college students in the room. And it was fine, I guess. Nobody called me out on it. But we get done and they start asking questions. We get to the, hey, has anybody got any questions point of the Bible study? And I start getting these questions about like the significance of the text. Like, what do I do with this in my life? Why is it important? How do I apply this? And they're really good questions. I didn't know how to answer them at all. And so I did what a public relations guy would do. I made up something that I thought sounded good. And I knew in my heart, I'm just kind of making something up right now. I went home that night and man, I broke down. I began, sobbing because the realization hit me that I had, since that time when I had given my life to Christ when I was 7, I'd grown up in the church. I'd spent so much time studying the Bible in all these different capacities. I'd went to a Christian university for 4 years. And here I am presented with an opportunity to teach these 30 or 40 students what the scriptures not just say, but mean, what they mean for their life. And I couldn't do it because I couldn't do it in my own life. And man, it shattered me. And so I kind of decided at that moment, I think this is probably what I'm supposed to be doing with myself. And I am rather ill-equipped to do so. And so I probably need to take it seriously. And that put me on a trajectory of actually heading back to school and going through seminary and starting to really try to figure out what does it mean to teach people the scriptures and how do I, like in earnest, disciple other people in the way that it seemed like the Lord was directing my path.
I love how God changed your passion. It sounds like almost instantaneously. And not just changed it because you're gaining a passion for growing in your faith and growing in not just deciphering Scripture, but being able to exposit Scripture. But he also dulled your passion for anything else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's kind of how it went. I made the jump to do it, and I've not looked back.
The common thread of God and his sovereignty, as you said, saying, I know how to reach Keelan, and the way I reach him may look a little different, but
That's right.
I'll do it in a way that resonates with him. When we hear the words call to ministry in church world and in Christianity, we think, oh, he's going to go be a pastor and a preacher and be in a pulpit. Maybe it's a big church, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Walk us through just maybe briefly a little bit of okay, God, you're calling me, and you're calling me to teach, I think. Does that mean I have to stand behind a pulpit all the time?
No. That's a great question. So at that moment in the calling, I just assumed it meant what I was doing with college students, right? Because this is where I first feel it. And it probably means some kind of pastoral ministry. Maybe I'm going to want to be a pastor in a local church. And just kind of let me lay out for those who are, listening or watching this and don't know anything about me. I have at this point served as a pastor in a local church. I've planted churches here in the States. I've served overseas as a missionary. So I've hopped around to 2 or 3 or 4 different pathways to Great Commission ministry. But at the time, I was kind of locked into the one that I was in. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this just means I'm going to want to be a pastor in a church. And so I'm starting to think about, like, what does it mean to learn how to preach? And how do I do this kind of stuff? And I was on that trajectory until I wasn't on that trajectory, is really how that worked. And our church, as I was kind of leaning into working with our college students there, our church got very involved in some international missions work overseas, particularly in West Africa. So we hit this moment in a partnership that we had in West Africa where the field team, they had a team of missionaries there in West Africa, and they needed some kind of long-term personnel to help facilitate that new work. And so they put a request on the books to hire a new missionary. And the request was specific. It was very specific because of the context for a guy who was single, but had some theological training, like graduate level theological training already. And was in a position to be able to kind of throw everything aside and move overseas to West Africa for a number of years and try to help facilitate this process. And so, like a good church member, I start praying for the Lord to send us this person. And through praying that the Lord would answer our church's need to have this kind of person on the field, I guess it was the Spirit just eventually tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Psst, like, you're the guy. Like,
Yeah, you're holding up the
it's
show,
you. Go do it." And so it
Right.
moved from praying about, hey, Lord, why don't you send us this guy, to God, is it me? So the ideal I had in my head about ministry calling, me being some guy in a suit and tie standing up every Sunday morning preaching sermons, like that kind of fell apart. And the next thing I knew, I'm on an airplane to Africa, to an area where there are no churches. Like, it was a Muslim background area. It was
Right.
an unreached area. And so I was now going to be going into villages and doing bush evangelism and rural church planting.
Right.
And so my idea of calling completely shifted in that moment. And he redirected my affections and the opportunities that were in front of me in such a way that it changed my career path again.
Yep. Again, if you're listening, we're with Dr. Keelan Cook, and I know in our intro we rattled off your titles, but I think it's a good time to remind everybody. You're currently the Assistant Professor of Missions, and you're the Director of the Center for Great Commission Studies at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and that was a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, and I'm real impressed that you pulled it off.
But tell us what that means. I can kind of put my own implications in there and guess
Sure.
a few things, but obviously you're teaching and you're guiding seminary level students. But what does your role entail for you there?
So the assistant professor part, right? So I'm a professor of missions here at the school. I teach missions at Southeastern. The majority of our students are still here training to be pastors or counselors or
Right.
educators
Sure.
or something to that effect. But we have a very large number of students here that are thinking about going overseas or going to plant a church somewhere in North America. So my job is kind of twofold. I teach a number of those missions classes. But in addition, I direct our missions center. We have a number of ministry centers here at the school. Our biggest one is the Center for Great Commission Studies, and that is our missions center. And so its purpose is to help our students figure out how in the world they're going to fulfill the Great Commission in their own calling. You brought this up earlier. There are many different pathways to Great Commission ministry. It is not just standing behind a pulpit and preaching. There's all kinds of different pathways. Some of those lead through what we would think of as traditional vocational ministry, like being an international missionary or being a church planter or revitalizing a church, being a pastor, something to that effect. But there are all kinds of ways to do it in the marketplace. There are all kinds of ways to use your gifts and your talents and your skills or your desire to serve in some other kind of career choice and still be about that commission that we've been given to go and make disciples of all nations. And so our office works with students to help them figure out, is it one of these kind of vocational pathways? If it's not, what is it? How are you going to be engaged in that work? And so we do a whole lot of mobilization work. We do a whole lot of equipping work for students to be able to engage in that kind of stuff. So there's kind of this expectation that while a student is a student with us, they'll go on at least one of our school mission trips. We have about 12 or 14 of those a year. They go all over the world. They're a class at Southeastern. And they're actually a core class for most of our degrees. You kind of have to go on one to finish your degree. And so I lead a bunch of those, and our office is the one that facilitates all of them. And so we're trying to get students to see firsthand, what would it look like to be a missionary in this place? Or what would it look like to be a church planter over here? Or how could I join a church plant team all while using my business degree or my communications degree or whatever in the area? And so we do a whole lot of that work to help mobilize our students to be engaged in the Great Commission in some capacity, and then equip them to be able to do so.
How interesting is your passport? If I were to flip through there, how colorful is that thing?
It's pretty colorful. It is pretty colorful. For those who don't know, if you do enough international travel, they actually make inserts where you can put more pages into your passport and make it even thicker. And so I can't think of a 10-year period in the last few decades where I've not had to add that to my passport,
right?
In order to get more space for stamps. It's the virtue of the job, right? Like I find myself, 4, 5, 6 times a year, I'm somewhere overseas in some country in the world, serving alongside a team of missionaries, or somewhere here in the States, working with a church plant or a replant or something to that effect.
I want to get to talking about that a little bit, but before we do, I'm just going to be I don't know what the right word is, just standing on corner peeking in the window for a minute, but I want to ask you some maybe superlative questions. You've been in a lot of different places. Do you know the number of countries you've been to? Did you look that up, or do you know that number offhand?
I don't. If I had to guess, we're probably sitting somewhere between 30 and 40, if I had to guess.
And I know what don't take the out of, gosh, it's hard to pick, and there's not a better, people group versus this, but we'll start with some easy ones. If you could go somewhere over and over and over and over because of your experience on missions there, where would that be?
Yeah, gracious. So it's a good question. There's two ways to look at it, though, and I'll give you an answer in both ways. One way is the place, like the environment itself, right? There are some places in the world that I would just go visit that place like over and over and over again. Just recently, this past year, actually, went to probably one of the most fascinating places I've got to travel yet. It was in a Central Asian country that I probably don't need to tell you the specific place. And it was mind-boggling, the history in that location. And so the particular ministry path that we were taking, the area that we were working in, was on the ancient Silk Road. And so we're working in all of these historic capitals of ancient empires. The architecture and the culture in those areas it's ancient and it's rich and it's beautiful. And so it's just amazing. History is one of the things I teach. I'm a missions history teacher. That's one of my classes. And so I love history anyways. And I could just go geek out in a place like that all the time. So there's places that are just remarkable. And some of those in that crescent or that cradle area of human civilization, there's just something remarkable about being in those places. Those the people, right? There's place, but then there's the people. And man, I tell you, it's funny. So I mentioned earlier that I went to West Africa to serve when our church sent me to be a missionary. And I've been to a lot of different places in the world at this point and worked with a lot of different people. But there's just something about West Africans that make them an absolute joy to be around. They are gregarious, they're loud, they're funny, they don't know what a watch is.
I was going to say you can forget knowing what time it is, other than it's light and
exactly
now it's dark, and so
But they are people oriented to the max. They are not time oriented, and so the most important person is the one that I'm with, and they make you feel that way, right? They love to laugh, and it's fascinating because it's also the poorest region of the world. They have less than anybody else in the world. And yet they seem to be some of the happiest people I've ever met. I'd go there all the time because of that. Yeah, I think there's something to that as well.
Oh, two great lessons. Who's the most important person? The one I'm spending time with right now. And contentment has no price tag. It's a mindset. It's not just a mindset. It's a lifestyle of contentment.
That's right.
It is. I agree. So what about... This may be harder to answer. You may say, I'd just rather not. The least receptive people group that you if maybe there's some people listening to the podcast. I know certainly some of your students that wrestle with at least a season of their life, if not their entire life, in international missions. And where would be somewhere you go, that's tough. The people group there are the least receptive to anything outside of what they know, certainly the gospel.
Yeah. It's hard to quantify them. In my experience, the places that have been hardest are likely the places where there is an intense social pressure to conform to the majority religion. You get into the stans, all the countries that end in stan, just in that area in general, there's a very high social pressure to maintain Islam. The same is true in places I've been in North Africa. The moment the conversation strays to something they feel might get them in trouble, they get shifty on you. And so they start shutting down the conversation a lot of times. There's another kind of resistance, though, that I think really matters, and it may even matter more. There are other places in the world, and this is where I was in West Africa. So one of the most resistant places I think I've ever shared the gospel is actually where I served as a missionary long term. And I just said they're such sweet and open people. They'll talk to you about anything. They will. They'll have a gospel conversation with you real fast. They'll talk religious stuff all day long. So they're not resistant to the conversation. They're just resistant to the outcome. And so you'll talk over and over and over and over again, and you can talk religious matters with them all day long every day. But very few of them actually seem to move toward Christianity.
You know, you're a history guy. I taught history, but I'm more of a geography, overall people group, more nerd. More of I think if I had the wisdom at 18 or 19 that I have now, I would have been a sociology or a geography major, just because people groups and places are more interesting to me necessarily than history. The history obviously has to be a part of that study, but everyday people are not called all the time to long-term missions or to even what you do. But talk a little bit about, I'm going to be a good church member. I'm going to attend. I'll even teach a Sunday school class if you ask. I'll drive the bus because I have a CDL. You know, I'm just a really good church member. I want people around me to know Jesus Christ. But there's something, I think, God, I keep hearing every time my church goes on an international mission trip or a group from our area goes, there's a pull there that I want to experience that. I don't think everybody has to, but I certainly think God can call a lot of us to do that. How would you encourage someone that you go, just because you're being called or pulled towards one trip doesn't mean there's going to be a life spent across the pond, as it were. And also, there's those that are just frightened of the travel. Forget the while I'm there, but they're just, I've heard a lot of people go, I can't do that. I can't do that kind of travel. And I've been on a couple of longer ones like you're talking about. I've been to South Asia. That's a tough travel to do that. But how would you respond? I guess giving you more than one question woven in there, but it kind of addressed that concern level out of people.
Yeah, so let me see if I can organize some of what you just said into kind of a train of thought.
It probably needs it. It probably needs it.
So first off, like, let's deal with, is there benefit and advantage? Is there something good about regular church folk, regular church members who want to be good Christians in place where they are, engaging in international, like a short-term trip, something like that, right? I think there's a lot of value in that, a lot of value. And so if you're that person that says, I just don't think I could do that, either for the travel, like, because it's pretty Herculean jaunt over 36, 48 hours to get to some of these places that we go to, or I just don't know that I could be in such a foreign environment. I don't know that I could deal with the difference in culture and the difference in food and the difference in whatever. I am at this point convinced, because of the function I have at this institution, just about anybody can do just about anything for 10 days. And I think that's latch on to that as an individual. I think it's valuable for you to think, you know what, this may be a really substantial experience for me if I've never done anything like this, but have confidence in the fact that you've got a return ticket in your hand. There's something powerful about a return ticket that says I'm coming home in a week, that allows you to push through some things that may feel less than ideal. Almost always, the normative experience for me is when somebody goes on one of these for the first time. I think they think this was incredible most of the time. More often than not, even somebody who is shifty about should I have done this or can I do this or I can't do this, once they actually get into that space, they realize, no, there's actually something really valuable and significant about me being here. That calling to go and make disciples and the work that takes is the exact same thing that we're actually about doing in our local churches here. So for you to be a faithful church member, I want to serve well. The things that you see them doing over there, we need to be about them here as well. And so there's this lifetime pursuit idea that you can bring back and put into play here among your neighbors, among your friends, among the circles of people that you know, and in coordination and conjunction with your local church in the way that they would see fit to have you engage those around you.
I think I've seen that as often as it helped me personally, is it redirected how I operate in my faith walk. Not just so that it benefits me, but Yeah, the Great Commission is not just to the ends of the earth. There's some places that Jesus called us to hit before we get to the ends of the earth, and they're around us. It's a great segue to it. So I know part of your role as you take some of these groups around the world is not just to encourage those groups, but to encourage the people in the field and the boots on the ground, if you will. How vital is that to those serving in hard places?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. For the missionary, encouragement is as important as air. And that may sound like an overstatement, but it's not.
If you love the shirt, then get on the Jesus One train by getting some gear yourself at JesusOneApparel.com today. Hats, hoodies, shirts, and more, all to help start conversations about Jesus and empower you to take a bold step by sharing the message from John 16:33 that they're founded on, that Jesus won. Use our code associated with the podcast, 315 Voices, for your discount today. That's JesusOneApparel.com.
To be able to provide for them continued support and encouragement is what keeps them happy and healthy. It's what keeps them on the field, which means it's what keeps those people in places that have no gospel access. And if missionaries flame out because they've got no support structure back at home, then the presence is lost. So it's super important to be able to provide that kind of encouragement. But man, I tell you, I see it all the time. Like I get to visit a lot of missionaries in place on the field, and you can tell the ones that have got good encouragement and support, and then you can tell the ones that don't. They don't have any.
13 years ago, one of the trips that we took was to do that very thing, which was to take everyone in that cluster and bring to one central location for a week of encouragement. And I had no idea. I knew why we were going, but until I got there and spent a week around those families and those couples that were serving and were alone, where they got to spend a week where they were not so alone. They were reminded of each other and the struggles. And I know technology age, it's easier to stay connected now than it was 30 years ago to each other. But just being in the room with each other, we were not really that helpful. The team that we were on, we certainly tried to encourage, but the encouragement was seeing each other. Because you know what each other's going through. And that taught me a lot. That's why I asked the question about the encouragement piece, because that taught me a lot about that and how vital that really is for them.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Now that we're in the internet age, you can talk instantaneously to basically anybody in the world that's got some kind of internet connection. And there's some value. Man, there's so much value in that. However, there's another side to that coin. It's easy for us to think that replaces deep connection, and it often doesn't. There's still a need for a kind of embodied presence, if you will, some face-to-face, I can wrap my arms around you and give you a hug kind of connection and presence.
Yep.
There's a need for that, and right now, technology can't facilitate that. That still takes a plane, right? Like you just have to get on an airplane and make that kind of thing happen. And so it's a pretty crucial piece of it. What
a rewarding part of your task there. Like anybody else, we've all got jobs where there's things that we don't like about our job. There's some rewarding pieces to being able to do that and know and have the knowledge of what you're accomplishing even before you set out to do it. So one thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is when we hear missions, and we've talked a lot about it. In fact, we've talked nothing more than about international missions, but talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of your students will end up as church planters here in North America or in the United States even. That is growing, or has it plateaued a little in the growth over the last probably 15, 20 years, and what do those look like now, and what are some challenges that come for those families, and why don't we think about that? When we say missions, we automatically think about Jakarta or Beijing, and we don't think about Salt Lake City.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I'm really glad you asked that, actually. So when we talk about our missions center here at the school, the Center for Great Commission Studies, there's a bit of intentionality in the fact that we're not called just like the World Missions Center. And the reality is that like, there is North American missions is a thing. So the conversation about North American church planting, and then just like replanting, revitalization, churches being about the work of Great Commission ministry here, that's all a missions conversation that needs to be had. I see a lot of really good church planting efforts and work that are happening in a number of places around the world. You brought up like Salt Lake City in Utah, man. There's some phenomenal work that's happening there in church planting. They're finding some real traction now among people and a genuine interest. So there's some bright spots. That said, there's a whole lot of obstacles now that we didn't used to face that just seem to be exacerbating. You get into cities in particular, and the cost of church planting, cost of living has skyrocketed, and then the ability to find a location to meet. If we're going to be a church that's like, we need a brick and mortar space or we need somewhere that we can rent, it's cost prohibitive. So there's some obvious challenges that are presented now that are worse maybe than they've ever been. So you've got some good and some bad with it, I think.
Yeah, and I think the encouragement piece is still important. Like we talked about with international missions, it might feel a little better on some ends that my frustration can be solved by getting in a vehicle and versus a longer travel and more expensive travel. But
I'll tell you one thing. So you bring up the encouragement piece, and there's something very important here. The stressors may be different, but there are very real and heavy stressors for people that are moving to a city in the States. It's too thin an understanding of a calling to church planting, international or North American, to think, well, the international missionaries, oh man, they're the ones that are doing the really stressful work.
Right.
You're just doing something kind of stressful. It's not really that stressful. You're getting to move to a big cool city like New York or Denver or San Diego, and so that sounds fun. That's a misread. Fact of the matter is, there's a level of stress that brings that's a completely different kind of stress, but is no less heavy.
It's a great point. I think it's something that we do. That's why I say, why do we forget about? If we say mission in church and you've never been on any kind of trip that looks like missions, you immediately think he's taking me to and fill in the blank with something super hard, with food I don't like, with all of these things. And no, we could mean go support a family that's working extremely hard to spread the gospel in an area that needs it, or it wouldn't be targeted for the need. So good stuff. So you've mentioned the Center for Great Commission Studies. I think that's a wealth of information if people wanted to kind of dive into some of the things that you've talked about today. The website's thecgcs.org. What all can they dive into there?
Yeah, so we've got a handful of things there. The biggest brunt of what we do is directed toward our students, of course. We're trying to help them figure out where they're going to go and getting them equipped to do that. But there's a whole other lane that we run in as a mission center that's really just about like helping the church know what it's supposed to be doing and helping people in churches know what they're supposed to be doing. So there's this kind of external facing side of it. That's kind of found at our website, right? So thecgcs.org. And there you can find a handful of different resources that we have. We run some pretty regular articles on that site. They're usually written by alumni of ours. And so you've got people who are planting churches overseas, or they're an international missionary, or they're a church planter here in the States, or they are a pastor, or they work in some kind of capacity here in this, or they're in market placement. They're a businessman, or they're a teacher or a counselor or something to that effect. But they're talking about, here's how I fulfill Great Commission ministry in a marketplace initiative, in a regular old vocational job that most people would have. If we have a newsletter you can sign up for that pumps those into your inbox about, I think it's twice a month maybe. The other thing that we do is we have a weekly podcast as well. It's called The Sent Life, and you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever. And we do some similar conversation there to what we're talking about here. We talk about missions and what does it look like to get engaged in that work. And it's not just like what does it look like to become a missionary. It's really more about what does it look like to live this sent life, because it's one that we're all supposed to live. So how do we all activate to be engaged in that kind of work?
I don't have to be called to full-time anything.
Absolutely.
how can I increase my capacity and how I can support missionaries in the field, or even gain an experience that helps me where my faith walk is here at home. It's really good stuff. And so not only that, I'm glad you mentioned the Sent Life. That's another place to find you, or your blog at KeelanCook.com. Lots of articles. I know that I will often click on one of those when I see them come across my social media feed. So if your ticker's at 10, it could have been at 9. I helped you out. But one of my favorite things that we do on the podcast is a guest takes a 315 challenge. Not super challenging, but
right.
The 3 is a selfish part for me because I like hearing what books have impacted someone else. So what are the 3 books outside of Scripture? If you said these 3, I can only recommend 3 books. It would be these.
I'll do one practical. I'll do one kind of literature-y, if that's a word, and then I'll do another one that's a bit heady because I do teach seminary, right? So first one's Master Plan of Evangelism. If I was going to have people in my church read one book on what does it mean to be engaged in the Great Commission, it's probably that one. It's by a guy named Rob Coleman, The Master Plan of Evangelism. The literature book that has probably made the most impact on me, I'm going to cheat here, maybe Pilgrim's Progress. I picked that one up shortly after college, and man, I was taken back by John Bunyan's artful take on the Christian life and what it means to journey well, but it might be the Narnia books. I'm going to slide that in there.
I knew
those
you were
books
a fan.
Got me to read.
I knew you were a C.S. Lewis guy.
Man, I love it. I just love it. So I as short side story here for you. I got as a Christmas present shortly after I graduated. I was not a reader. Man, I did not like reading. And then I got the whole box set of the Chronicles of Narnia. These are kids' books, right? And I just graduated college and got that for Christmas. And I picked one of them up because I didn't have anything else to do. And I wound up reading that whole set in a week. And it was after that I realized, I actually think I really like reading, and there's probably something valuable about it. So that set kind of turned me back onto reading. But we'll just make that aside. Let's stick with Pilgrim's Progress. And then Theology of the New Testament is my third book that I choose. It's by a guy named George Ladd. I stumbled across that book, and it set my categories for how I understand the kingdom of God. And man, all kinds of stuff just fell into place for me. And I'm like, this is what it means. This is what it means. Like, this is how the life works now. It was tremendous. So probably those 3.
Yeah, 3 and plus a set that you stuck
plus
in
a whole
there,
set of 7.
Okay. That's okay. So your 3 was 9, but we'll do it out of 10. No, it's great. And in that last book that you mentioned, Theology of the New Testament, I've not read that, but just the way you describe it, what's fascinating to me is how God gives all of us exactly what we need to answer the questions. If we sit down and we say, God, I don't understand, help me in my lack of understanding. Sometimes that's Narnia level read, and sometimes it's the theology of the New Testament.
That's it.
With good stuff.
That's exactly right.
One is fun. If you say, okay, I'm going to grab my phone and this person would answer, call back, or hit me back, or whatever, the most famous person in your phone, most recognizable name.
Man, I can't think of a truly famous person in my phone. If you work in church ministry, I've got some names you'd probably recognize in my phone. So probably the most recognizable one is Dr. Danny Aiken. He's the president of our seminary. Is a fairly widely known individual at least in our Southern Baptist circles. I don't know, maybe Ed Stetzer. That's another. He's kind of a theologian that a lot of people would recognize.
I like
Ed's
Ed Stetzer.
phone number. He'd probably answer if I called.
Oh, good.
So we could.
I recognize both names. If it helps, it helps you feel good about it. So the 5 is also hard. These sound fun, but if you had 5 minutes to spend with someone, anytime, they can be the office next to you or someone that's existed in the annals of history, and you say 5 minutes stinks. Well, it's a 315 challenge, so that's what's going to have to happen. Who would you spend your 5 minutes with?
I will overthink this question if I don't just give you a quick answer. All right, so here's a weird one. There's a guy from church history from like the late 100s AD. His name's Irenaeus. Irenaeus was a bishop and missionary in the city of Lyon, which is now in France. And he was third generation from Jesus. Here's what I mean by that. The guy that led Irenaeus to Christ, the guy that taught him the gospel and then discipled him, his name was Polycarp. Polycarp was led to Christ by the Apostle John, who was, of course, led to Christ by Christ. And so he's got this kind of real clean, direct line to, like, Jesus himself in his own discipleship, right? And so he's this bishop in Lyon, and he's a missionary there trying to reach all the pagans in that part of the Roman Empire at the time. And I bring him up because he died a martyr. So somewhere right around 202 AD, he's killed because he won't renounce the faith. There's this fresh round of persecution that kind of crops up, and he's made to renounce, and he won't do it. And the thing that's fascinating to me about Irenaeus, that could not have caught him off guard, because that's what happened to Polycarp. A generation before, the guy that led him to Christ had been his own mentor in the faith, was killed because he wouldn't renounce Jesus. And of course, Polycarp's discipler landed on the Isle of Patmos, right? And so there's this clear line that he would have to understand. And despite that, knowing the stakes that he knew, he gave his life to this work anyway. And I feel like 5 minutes with a guy like that would probably be pretty valuable.
I've not heard of him, and I think you'll be the only person to answer that. But
probably.
It's a fascinating story. Your person's interesting, but what's it a reminder of? It's a reminder of all of the stories that have shaped our story. And you don't have a direct line to John. Maybe you do, but that I know of, you don't have a direct line to John. But John's story is important in shaping who shaped others, and so is ours, as long as the Lord tarries, as the Baptist circles say it. Then it's important to us. Keelan, it's been a treat to just sit down and listen to your take, somebody that's really on the front of mission work in current faith. And often we have some experience at different levels with mission work, international or local. But super interesting. I've got 10 more questions, but that's not what the time has. But
sure,
it's been great to sit down with you and hear about the work that you're doing and the experiences.
Man, I have loved it. This was a great conversation. It's so good getting to catch up with you and do this, Greg. I appreciate you having me on, man.
And I hope you enjoyed our time today with Dr. Keelan Cook as much as I did. Hearing how he has taken the Great Commission and applied it to his life's work is inspiring. And doing it in a manner that not only spreads the gospel, but stewards the call by pouring into others on the same mission is a challenge that can apply to all of us. Like today's episode, push it out on all of your social media platforms, and share this podcast with someone you know in order to encourage and inspire them. And join us again to hear someone give the reason for the hope that's within on the next episode of 315 Voices.